Ekotürk'ten merhabalar. Bugün eğitimle alakalı çok değerli bir konuğumuz var. Dünyada eğitim deyince akla gelen ilk isimlerden bir tanesi. Andreas Schleicher bizlerle. Kendisi İstanbul'da ve kendisinin Türkçe'de yeni çıkan, Türkçe'ye de çevrilen Dünya Okulu 21. Yüzyılın Okul Sistemi Nasıl Kurgulanmalı adlı kitabı. Bunu da konuşacağız ve eğitimle alakalı, Türkiye'de eğitim, dünyada eğitim ile alakalı pek çok konuyu kendisiyle konuşacağız. Welcome, sir. We can start. I would love to start with your book, which is published in Turkish as well recently, I think. It's Dünya Okulu, World School, and how to build a 21st century school system. I would like to start with this, your own question actually, how to build, how to establish a world school in this century. Can you give us a very short answer as a starting point?
You know, it starts with having a clear idea of what the future will look like and how do we need to prepare young people for their future rather than our own past. Now, much of our education system is about transmitting the established wisdom of our times to the next generation. We put too little emphasis on helping young people to question the established wisdom of our times, to be open for the novelty. Not only to learn things, but also to unlearn and relearn things when the world is changing. And the capacity to think for yourself and be able to work with others. That's the starting point, really, for tomorrow's education system. And then, of course, the question is about capacity. The quality of education can never exceed the quality of teaching and that kind of learning organization. How do we actually create the capacity, the kind of learning environments that help students to become active learners and participants? And that raises then the question of the entire system. Like the past, we had very industrial education systems. Schools were built like factories. You had somebody, creating a curriculum and then sending it to all schools, expecting schools to teach that curriculum. The future work organization will be much more professional, where teachers at the front line are not only the transmitters of knowledge, but also the creators, the designers of innovative learning environments, teachers who understand how students learn and how students learn differently and who can support students with this. So I think this is very, very important to create education systems that are organized much more professionally rather than industrially. So I think there are many elements, but what inspired me most is that we can see many of those elements actually now happening around the world. Actually, there are many, many good examples, including in Turkey. You find, overall you can say the results are still, quite low in performance, but you find many great examples of good education.
Yeah, I will come to Turkey and we will talk about it a lot actually. Yeah. But also I would love to hear about PISA. Mm-hmm. You're the director of PISA, Program for International Students Assessment. But also at the same time you are you are making a great emphasis on teachers. You are also assessing teachers as well, or it's just students?
No.
And from the students' side, how is the performance of Turkish students especially? And as I said, do you also assess teachers' skills as well?
Yeah, PISA is primarily about understanding what students know, what they can do, their attitudes, their well-being. Those are the kind of things that we look at in education. Turkey has seen over the last sort of decades quite good improvement in the quality of education, PISA scores. But when it comes to student well-being, students are often very anxious about exams. They are sort of very narrowly focusing on success on exams. That's very clearly visible in the PISA results. Whereas broader qualities of student success, capacity to think creatively, to solve complex problems, to think across the boundaries of school disciplines, they're a lot less well developed according to PISA. But then, as you say, we also look at the parent side, the teacher side, the school side. And we're surveying teachers. It's not so much a test of teachers, but we want to understand how teachers relate to students, how teachers relate to other teachers. To what extent do teachers, work in isolation in their classrooms as knowledge transmitters, or to what extent are they working with their colleagues to, invent and frame new practice? So it looks at education in a quite comprehensive way.
So what surprised you most while assessing Turkish students in specific, actually? You said, okay, we don't like tests, and I think most of the students all around the world they have pretty much similar results. Is it true, or?
Well, I think there's a lot of variability across countries and within countries. Now, what surprised me most about Turkey is not sort of the overall level of performance, but that Turkish students are quite good when it comes to reproducing subject matter content. Turkish students know a lot, but Turkish students are relatively weak when it comes to using their knowledge, applying their knowledge, questioning that knowledge, extrapolating from this. I'll give you an example. When you test Turkish students in subject matter knowledge in biology and chemistry, they're quite good.
Really?
But when you look at whether they can think like a scientist, you know, design an experiment, identify, you know, cause and effect, understanding which questions are scientifically investigable and which are not, students often struggle with this. And I think in the future, those kinds of thinking like dimensions will become more important. The content knowledge changes very rapidly. Tomorrow's content will be very different from today's content. But do we understand the architecture of a discipline? Can you think like a mathematician? Can you think like a scientist? Can you think like an historian? Those are aspects where I found, you know, the biggest kind of surprises. The other thing is that success in education still depends a lot on the social background, on family background in Turkey. If you come from a wealthy background, you get a great school and a great education. If you come from a poor background, educational opportunities are much more limited. You know, so that's something.
And here, how do you see like private schools? Because we have so many private schools, and they are, of course, they give very quality education. But also it brings inequality as well. So what should we do? Because a lot of parents in Turkey, I mean, I don't have a kid, so I cannot judge, but if I had a kid, I wouldn't probably send him or her to a government school. But private schools are extremely expensive, so how to, you know, this balance, what to do about it?
I think that's a big question for many countries. Now, how do you actually reconcile choice with equity? Or variability with equity. I personally believe that private schools can create a good model, an innovative model for education. The public school system can learn from this. There are also many good public schools in Turkey, and don't forget that. Sometimes they get buried in a lot of schools that are not so good, but actually there are some very successful both public and private schools in Turkey, and but the system is using that expertise too little. Like if you are a good public or private school, you don't have much of a responsibility to improve the education system. I think that's one of the things where I think Turkey could draw a lot more benefit, you know, to get your best teachers become the mentors of teachers who are still in development, to have your best schools playing a role to create more system capacity. That's what Turkey can learn from countries like Vietnam, from China, which are very, very good in linking high-performing and low-performing schools so that the quality of the overall education system advances. Now, it's not enough to have some really good schools, and as you say, if there's a lot of variability in school quality, that become easily a kind of social discriminator. Now, that's also visible in Turkey.
Yeah. I was wondering the other countries' performances. You mentioned two countries now, China and Vietnam. How do they do? What do they do? And especially Finland. We always hear about Finland in Turkey. Always, it's the best model in education. You know, they say Finland is the best example in terms of education. So, which country is doing the best in terms of education, and why?
Well, you know, it depends always what you look for. What is very interesting in Finland, that it has created a very kind of open education system, one that is very much focused on competency, on applied learning, on subject learning, cross-disciplinary learning, I think, and has a very high quality of teaching. Everybody in society wants to become a teacher. Teaching is the most selective profession. If you don't make it into a teacher education, you can still apply in, you know, economics and law. So it's the most prestigious kind of education because teaching is such an interesting job. But Finland is very hard to emulate. Finland has a long history of doing this. I think countries for, you know, Turkey to look for If you want to, in Europe, you know, the Netherlands is an interesting model, a very kind of dynamic education system, a lot of diverse schools, most schools are actually, you know, privately owned but government sponsored, so that avoids the problem of social discrimination. I think, and then, you know, countries like Vietnam, like China, like Singapore, they have limited resources. That's what makes them interesting for Turkey. Now, they spend relatively little on education and have more recently established, you know, a lot of capacity in the system.
So you don't have to spend billions to establish a good
Well, money
education.
always helps,
Of
but actually the link between money and outcomes is a lot more tenuous than you think. Also the link between time. We often think, you know, you have to spend more time on mathematics to get better math results. There's no such relationship. The quality of learning environments is far more important than the learning opportunities. To give your teachers more time for other things than teaching. What we can learn, for example, the lessons from China and Vietnam are, you know, pairing high and low performing schools, attracting the most talented teachers to the most challenging classrooms. If you're a vice principal in a high performing school in Vietnam and one day you say, I want to become a school principal, the education system will tell you, well, that's a great aspiration, but first help us turn around one of the lowest performing schools. So they always get their best people in the most difficult circumstances to work. They also give them a lot of room for entrepreneurship. Actually, for example, China has a digital platform where teachers can upload their own projects, their ideas, and their lesson plans. And the trick is they combine that with reputational metrics. So the more other teachers download your ideas, improve your ideas, use your ideas, the more you rise in prestige. And at the end of the school year, your principal will not only ask you how well did you teach your own students, but actually what contribution did you make to the education system? How do you help other teachers advance? So building that kind of collective capacity is very, very important. No? In Turkey, you spend a lot of time pushing ideas, you know, into classrooms and schools, top down. You spend too little time to find the good ideas in the schools, in the classrooms, and to scale them, to spread them, to make sure that, you know, the good ideas grow from the great experiences. If you're a great teacher in Turkey, you have a very comfortable life. You just teach your students and everybody is happy. But you don't have much of a link to the next teacher and the next school. And I think that's where a lot of capacity is dormant. If you would be a great surgeon in Turkey, everybody in the country would know you. Everybody from across
Turkey. And of course
Turkey.
you would make much more money. I mean,
That's a part of the, yeah, but that's also part of the story. You know, we would actually reward and recognize good practice. But for me, actually, the professional recognition is more important than the financial recognition.
Yeah.
If you would be a
it's very
surgeon,
strong incentive, of course.
if you would be a great surgeon in Turkey, you wouldn't want to do the standard operation every day. You want to do the most difficult operation with the most difficult patients. So there is an incentive for us to invest our energy where we can make most of a difference. If you come from a wealthy family in Turkey, you're going to have a great life. You know, you're going to have very many open doors in your life, everywhere, even without a good school. But if you come from a poor family, you've got only one single chance in life to succeed, and that is a good school. If you miss that boat, you're not going to get a second chance. So very few people get a second chance. So I think that's very, very important to have a better alignment of resources with the needs.
Teachers are very important, of course, in education system, and unfortunately in Turkey, I mean, I don't know your own observations. I will love to hear more about your observations about from the teacher's perspective. But I wouldn't say that I would love to be a teacher if I was a kid now, because I mean, there's no incentive, to be honest.
Yeah.
No financial incentive or another incentive in Turkey. So how to attract more, teachers, or how to incentivize, and what are your observations about Turkey and from teachers' perspective, especially?
Yeah, you know, again, the quality of education can never be better than the quality of teachers. So teachers are really the critical path of improvement. And the first part is to make teaching financially attractive. But that, in my view, is just the starting point. The more difficult and important challenge in Turkey, in my view, is actually to make teaching intellectually more attractive. And that means giving teachers more opportunities to actually, work with other teachers, to develop new educational practice, to become, researchers, to become designers, to become mentors of other teachers, to be mentored, to become facilitators. I think that's very, very important. That as a teacher, you have more room. At the moment, you just teach a curriculum. But what attracts teaching to the profession, teachers to the profession, is to make a real difference to the lives of students, to make a difference to society. When you ask teachers in Turkey, that's what they say. We survey teachers. They all say we have that kind of idea to change things in the lives of people, to help people grow in their lives. But we don't give teachers much opportunity for this. You teach mathematics, you teach science. And I think what teachers need to have more room to understand the dreams and ideas and visions of students and to help them, realize those things. I think that will be a more rewarding experience for the students, for the teachers. Project-based learning, where students work more on, enduring projects rather than on small kind of tiny solutions. I think there's so many things that we can do to make teaching intellectually more attractive. But most important is to create a stronger profession, where the profession owns its practice. At the moment, the work organization in Turkey is very industrial. It's like schools are built like an assembly line, with teachers as exchangeable widgets. I exaggerate, but that's sort of the philosophy of the current school system, a big kind of factory. And to create a more professional work environment, I think it's very important to make teaching more attractive intellectually for people. Then the salaries are also important, but that's not, when you ask people, why did you become a teacher? It's not because I want to make a lot of money. I want to make a difference. So giving teachers those kinds of opportunities, I think, is very important. The recognition, the social recognition of teachers is very important. To what extent, would you want your teacher, your child to become a teacher as opposed to become, a lawyer or, an engineer? I think those questions are very important.
In terms of technology and digitalization, these are very important topics, of course. How does it affect the education system in general, and what's going to be the future of the education in terms of, for example, in Turkey, recently I see coding everywhere. All private schools are promoting, we teach kids coding everywhere in Turkey. So you think it's it's a good thing to teach them, even a 3-year-old kid learning coding? What do you think about these latest technologies and artificial intelligence and coding? Should we really teach the kids those things, or we should mainly focus on skills to learn and to always relearn? So I don't know. What's your point of view about it?
And I think there are 2 dimensions. One is what kind of skills and knowledge do young people need to succeed in a technology-rich world? And the second thing is, how do we harness technology for education, in education? I think both questions are really important. On the teaching of coding, it's one of the tools of our times, but we should never forget that coding is a tool. And sometimes, education gets obsessed with the tools rather than, for example, behind coding is the idea of an algorithm. The idea of computational thinking. That's the skill that we need to develop in young people. Understand the nature of an algorithm. Algorithms understand ourselves better than we understand ourselves, and that's why we become sort of the subjects. Digitalization can make us, to disempower us. We need to understand those mechanisms. That's what you need to teach, the concept of an algorithm. Coding is just a technique. Tomorrow the technique may be different.
Will change maybe.
It's like, writing. A century ago we started to write with pens, but we didn't focus on the pen, we focused on the writing skills. And the same is to today. The tools will change. By the time young people will graduate from school, they will probably ask you, remind me, what was coding? It's long gone past by those times. The tools change so fast, but the ideas are there. We need to, in a way, there's a big temptation for education to put more and more tools on top of each other. Today it's digital literacy, then comes environmental literacy, then comes financial literacy. There's a big temptation to sort of add more things to education. But the true success is to teach fewer things at greater depths. Again, rather to teach you all the points of chemistry and biology, teach you to think like a scientist, teach you to think like an historian. Historian is not about names and places and people. History is about understanding how the narrative of a society has emerged, how it has developed, how it advanced, how sometimes it unravels when the context changed. What does it mean for the times in which we live today? Those kinds of thinking and reasoning skills are important. Sometimes I see them getting lost when people focus on coding. Yeah. Is again, the fashionable tool of our times that dominates the learning. We're always good in educating students for our past, but not always for their future.
Yeah, I mean, it's also sad actually, because the things that we teach our kids change, but the way never changes.
Yeah.
I mean, coding is one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, the things change, but
and
I think the way you're saying that the way should change, the way you teach, should change.
Yeah, building curiosity, building agency among students, co-agency. I can do things by myself. I can work with other people who are different from me. I understand the structures of the disciplines, the nature of the disciplines. Those are the tools that empower people. And we need to become better in education to develop them, and then the surface will change. People will not accept to lose their job because a robot steals it if they don't feel prepared for the next one. And we focus too little on this, giving students the kind of tools to create a job rather than learn for a job.
I think the new generation is not going to look for jobs, but they will create their own jobs, right?
Absolutely. And I think education needs to provide them with the tools to actually see the future, shape the future. And we are too much focused on a world that is our past. And I think that technology, it comes to the second dimension, technology can play a great role in education. For example, why should you learn from the teacher who just happens to sit in front of you? If you can actually have access to teachers who teach exactly in the way in which you learn. So the technology can give you access to new ways of teaching, new content. Technology can make learning more interactive, more kind of participatory. Now you can no longer learn about an experiment, you can do an experiment in a virtual laboratory. That's all true.
The traditional concept of education, I think, or the idea of classrooms should also change. I think. I mean, it doesn't have to be a real classroom. Maybe. I mean,
it can change, but the nature of learning is a social and relational process. If you think about the teachers in your life that you remember, is the people who understood you as a person, who understood your dreams, who helped you realize your dreams. And I think that we must never forget. Technology can amplify good teaching, but technology will never replace poor teaching. That's, I think, a really important point.
I wonder, is there any teacher in your mind that you never forget? I mean, your own personal life. It's going to be a personal question, but
absolutely. When I started school, I was not very successful in school. And the teacher who transformed my kind of life was actually the conductor of, I played the violin, and I played in a youth orchestra, and we had an amazing conductor. People who has taught me to listen to other voices, to sort of see how a symphony is constructed, to exercise discipline, to practice, to work hard. And suddenly I became a good student. Everything around me, suddenly I understood, actually I can do things, I can learn things, and it makes a difference. And I can play a role in a kind of bigger context. So one person can change the lives of hundreds of people. I think in a way, teachers is the most important profession in our society and the most influential.
Definitely.
If we give them the tools and the roles. So for me, certainly, I have a good example for that.
And my last question will be about, since we are in Turkey, and we are the country who has the biggest number of refugees, and I think it's a very critical issue as well. And it's of course a global phenomenon, of course, only not limited to Turkey, but in general, how to incorporate refugees in the educational system, and because there are lots of criticism as well in Turkey that the kids of refugees are also, because of them, the quality of education is also decreasing, and in other countries as well, they are criticized. The refugees have been criticized. So how do you think Turkey is dealing with refugees in terms of education, and how to educate, especially the refugees, their kids, Do you have any specific projects going or any plans for the future? What do you think about this issue in specific?
Well, first of all, I don't think, can't think of any country that has been more generous than Turkey in accommodating people from Syria and so on, and also giving them places in education. I think, but we always, the visible children are always those who don't succeed, who have difficulties in schools. We actually often ignore the many refugees and immigrants who actually excel in education. When you look at the PISA data, for example, yes, you find many poorly performing refugee children. But you also find many children with very, very good results. And I think and that's something that we can see overall. The idea, for example, the refugees drag the performance of an education system down, there's no evidence to support it in PISA. Actually, there's no relationship between the share of refugees of a country and the overall performance. Yeah, because, you know, it's a very kind of wide distribution. But many refugees belong to the brightest people. You know, the people who actually come to Turkey are often not the poorest children, but they are the ones who actually, you know, choose to find a different lives. And giving them the opportunity, I think, over time will strengthen the Turkish education system enormously. It's a big burden, you know, also for the resources that requires. And again, Turkey has been enormously generous to actually create places for those children in the school system. And but, you know, investing in that, I see this as an asset. You know, in the long run, the economy will benefit from this. That's our experience across countries. You know? And doing this in the first generation, in a way, the difficult issue is that you have to do that in a very short time span. If children are properly integrated in the education system within, you know, 2-3 years, they will flourish. They will become very successful. If they're not well integrated in the first years, it will become an uphill struggle.